Hi, today I'm going to give a garden update. First, I wanted to comment on the bug that's on my thumb. The funky spring weather, because a lot of channels are commenting on that right now if they are growing in the Pacific Northwest. I have to concur that it's very cold. I'm not too upset about the rain or anything. I don't think that's a problem. There has been funky hail mixed in with the rain that I think is unusual. There's an apple tree that's behind me. That's my favorite apple so far, and it's already flowered, and there are a few flowers left. So I do have trees that have gone to bloom. My cherries, Asian plums, and the Asian pears. But I won't be able to comment on how the weather has affected the pollinators and the blossoms and the health of the trees until, I would expect fruiting this summer. I have seen more of the bee flies. The bee flies come before the bees. I think I've seen some of my neighbors' honeybees come, and very few bumblebees that I've seen. But I think that's pretty typical. It's probably atypical though, and I just don't notice it. So another thing I wanted to mention is that I just found out that I've had close contact with 2 people with COVID, and I've spent most of today resting, and I shouldn't even be out here. My one test has been negative, and I don't have any symptoms. I'm just hoping that I don't test positive tomorrow because I want to go to an event, and so it would be bad timing to have COVID tomorrow. Now, in terms of my warm crops that I am growing in combination in my house and on the deck, I have expected to bring them out earlier or leave them out on the deck earlier, but like yesterday was so cold that there was no part of the day that I wanted to bring them out. I think the high was in the high 40s, and it's supposed to be, like the low is supposed to be above 50 for these crops to come out. So it's just bipolar weather, but today, I can be out comfortably in a tank top. So they're out on my deck now, but I know a lot of people have been commenting that their warm season crops are going to be greatly delayed this year, and I would concur. In terms of slugs, some people could be saying that the slug activity is lengthened. I do know that slugs prefer temperatures between 50 and 60 degrees. That's when they're the most active. But since putting wood chips out, I don't have a lot of slug damage, and I'm about to show you what's germinated, and they're looking plentiful. I haven't been coming out here a whole lot, but there have been twice when I've noticed little slugs mowing stuff down or chewing on something, and I've taken them out. I probably shouldn't have, because it really needs to be thinned, and I think a future mature version of me would be able to come out, see slugs eating stuff, and just be like, go ahead. I know that you're just taking out the weak ones. You probably should leave them out to take out the weakest of the plants. Those are the ones sending out signals to be eaten. But I'm not at that mature stage yet. So if I see an invasive slug, I'll just take them out. I still take them out. Even though there's some crops like peas and fava beans that you're supposed to just grow in the fall, where you don't have to worry about the heat killing them early, I typically experiment with planting them in our springs, just because I know there's a good chance that our springs will last a long time. And what do you know? It has this year more than usual. So even if I'm late, or I was late planting them, maybe I'll still get something. But as I show you, my peas are really small, and I think to some extent you need warmer weather just to even get them going. I'm showing you what I've done as an experiment, so there's no fertilizer. That's probably a big factor too, is that they're growing in wood chips and chicken poo. When you have a permaculture food forest, you plant diversity, and so it's no year is ever a failure because there's always going to be some things that work and some that don't, and even things that work, they get stolen by raccoons or birds. So there's always going to be some kind of failure, but you're not really failing because you've planted a bunch of other stuff that are doing well, and you're going to have some harvest. Although I must say, people growing things in other parts of the country, they have bigger plants than I have. First, let me start by showing you the bed that I planted the most recently. It was one day last week. You see, it takes a lot longer than a week for these seeds to germinate. And this little section right here doesn't count because when I saw these little brassicas that came up on their own, I left them here. And then the wine caps from over there, turns out that they were underneath, and so they came up. They would have come up essentially there as well, but now they're going to come up in another part of the garden because I moved the wood chips somewhere else. And only these came up, the area that I didn't disturb. And there is some bird poo. One thing I noticed too is I see little holes. And in this bed, I did not plant any peas. So I'm not quite sure if there was a seed, any particular seed type that birds were looking for here. But they also come here looking for worms. So I don't know. But this was pretty typical on all 4 beds, as I noticed some digging. But that's why you seed abundantly, and I will still get plenty that come up. So this is the newest one, so that has the least amount of activity. The second to newest is this one, and it's actually not looking a whole lot better. And so I wonder if this could be a result of the bad weather. This might have been planted or seeded 2 weeks ago, and still not much going on here. Now the bed that you saw me seed was this one. And so this one is looking much better because this one is older still. Let me jump down there. This is the size of the brassicas that planted themselves in comparison to the ones that I seeded. And you can see that the peas that I wrapped in poo, they mostly came up. Of course, they're also very small for this time of year. I did plant them late. I've never been very successful with peas, but I bet on our summers starting really late, and that's why I still plant them later than most people do. And so you see a mixture of brassicas and lettuces, and you can see the beets and carrots and even onions. I think this is an onion, and most of the onions have their little seeds attached to them. So there's a wide diversity of plants growing here, and these are really close together. So if a slug came in here and thinned it out, That's really not a problem. And this was the very first bed that I seeded in this method. And this is the bed where I caught and killed the 2 slugs. And as you can see, it probably would have been a good thing to let it thin it out. Just because they're here doesn't mean I necessarily seeded them. For example, I saw a borage in here that I had to move because the borage is going to take up a lot of space. So it's possible that some of these are wild lettuces or brassicas that had seeded themselves. But I would say that I seeded these pretty early. So these were all direct seeded over a month ago. And this is how big they are. And I'm going to show you some shots of some lettuce that I planted among some other stuff. You should be able to recognize which are the lettuces. And I planted those maybe even late March, early April at the latest. And you can see they're still tiny. So that could be the best picture of how cold this spring has been and how small these are still. So this is why you have to learn the wild plants that are edible, because sometimes this is all you have in abundance when your other stuff should be bigger. Maybe this will be good for my COVID exposure. So let's get to, oh God, I was squatting for too long. So I'm just going to stretch out a little bit before I grab this camera. This fly might be interested in the poo. So I'm hoping that I don't get COVID, but I'll let you know.